So, if you'll recall at the end of chapter one, it talked about how when she was in the concentration camp, her mama would tell her stories before bed. And chapter one ended with when you were just a baby in that small town in Germany. And now chapter two begins, and it's called A Small Town in Germany. Hoya, that was the name of the town where Marion had lived for the first 4 years of her life. It lies on the Western River in northwestern Germany, about halfway between the cities of Hanover and Bremen. Like many of the old towns along the river, its streets were lined with pointy-roofed merchant houses, for the Weser was an outlet to the North Sea. Mama often recalled how, as a young woman of 20, she'd taken a very long train ride across northern Germany to, quote, seek her future, and ended up in all places, Hoya. Mama, who was born Ruth Moses, was the oldest of five daughters in a German Jewish family living near the city of Tilsit in the far off East Prussia. Today, Tilsit, renamed Solvix, is part of Russia. I wanted to get out of that small place, she told her children, so I answered an ad in the newspaper for a job as a bookkeeper. The first week, the first work I got was in Brockel, a place in Westphalia, to the south of here. But after a time, I saw an ad for a better job in a shoe store in Hoya. Hoya was even smaller than Brockel and much, much smaller than Tilsit. It only had 3,000 people and exactly 42 Jews. But I liked it, so I stayed. There was more to Mama's story than that. After working just 2 weeks at the Blumenthal's family business in Hoya, she received a marriage proposal from their son, Walter. And in December of 1931, when Ruth was 23 and Walter was 35, the couple married. Their first child, Albert, was born October 11th, 1932. Marion was born 2 years later on December 20th, 1934. Lena and Max Blumenthal, Marion's grandparents, whom she knew as Oma and Opa, were as much a part of her early memories as were her parents and her brother. The older Blumenthals lived on the second floor of a tall, sturdily built house in the town center. Marion's family lived on the third floor. On the first or ground floor was the store itself, where Papa and Opa sold shoes and men's and boys' clothing, and where Mama continued her bookkeeping and secretarial duties. Oma cared for Albert and Marion and cooked in the evening meal, for which the entire family gathered. While Marion and the baby was the baby of the family was sorry, While Marion, the baby of the family, was being rocked to sleep, the grown-ups sat around the table and talked. We talked, Mama remembered, about the store, about the events of the day, and mostly about that man Hitler. That man Hitler, he had been around for 10 years or more by the early 1930s when Albert and Marion were born. As a leader of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party was short for National, the German word for national. He ranted against communists, Jews, and gypsies, and against Slavic people such as Poles and Russians, all of whom he considered inferior. He also denounced any Germans who were crippled, deformed, or mentally ill as being unworthy of existence. Such nonsense, most people thought at first. The man was nothing more than a political crackpot with a small band of followers. In 1932, he had served 9 months in jail after a crazed attempt to overthrow the government. His Nazi party was only one of many political parties that were represented by a popular vote in the Reichstag, the lower house of the German parliament. Yet by 1930, the Nazi party had gained an alarming number of deputies in the Reichstag. In a little more than a year, its representatives have increased from 12 to 107. And 2 years later, in 1932, the Nazi Party, with 37% of the vote, was the largest in Germany. Too splintered politically to form a united front against the Nazis, the other parties had become small and helpless. Why, the Blumenthals debated around the family dinner table, had this frightening development taken place? One didn't have to look far for the answer. Economic conditions in Germany had been very bad ever since the defeat of the fatherland in the Great War of 1914 to 1918. That's World War I. And the worldwide depression that hit in 1929 had only made things worse. Hitler insisted that he'd had the remedy for all of Germany's woes. Through his frequent public speeches at massive Nazi sponsored rallies, he made his message clear. He would restore Germany's honor, increase its territory, and bring back its lost prosperity. His attacks on its quote enemies within, especially the Jews, grew more and more frenzied. Once again, the long smothering hatred of the Jews, known as anti Semitism, one of the oldest prejudices in the world, was fanned into flames. In one way, it seems strange that Hitler would pick on Germany's Jews because there were so few of them. They numbered only about 500,000 in a population of 67 million, less than 1% of the German citizenry. But in spite of being a minority, they were remarkably visible on German scene. True, Jews didn't run the giant industries of Germany, such as Krupp, Farben, and Siemens, nor did many Jews hold high political offices. But they were involved in businesses and professions such as banking, merchandising, publishing, medicine, science, and the arts. In the capital of Berlin, where about one third of Germany's Jews lived, the major department stores were Jewish owned. Wythenherm, Hermann Tietz Israel, and the famed KDW of Kosheim and the Western. Whatever abilities, talents, influence, or wealth of the Jews of Germany possessed were seen as a threat to the Nazis.